let's dive into another deep dive. Today, we're taking a look at AI, and specifically AI for spinal health.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, we've got this new research paper, and it's all about using AI to, well, basically read MRI scans of the spine.
Okay.
And it can actually measure things like the height of the discs between your vertebrae,
Uh-huh.
those little shock absorbers, and even the diameter of the spinal canal itself.
Right.
And those measurements are really important because they can help diagnose a bunch of different spinal conditions.
Yeah, for sure.
So what's really cool about this AI is that it's super accurate, like crazy accurate.
Oh,
And get this, it was trained on a data set of over 1 million MRI scans.
1 million.
1 million. Can you believe that?
That's wild.
Mind-blowing, right?
Yeah.
But before we get too deep into the AI stuff, I wanted to bring in our expert today who can really help us understand all of this.
Glad to be here.
So welcome. Really appreciate you joining us. I'm super curious to get your perspective on all of this.
Happy to share my thoughts. It's definitely a really exciting area of research. And when I saw this paper, I was really intrigued. It just shows how much potential AI has to, maybe even revolutionize how we think about spinal health.
Absolutely. So before we go full AI geek, could you just give us a quick, Spinal 101 reminder? Why are these spinal measurements so important in the first place?
Okay, sure. So think of your spine like the main support beam of your whole body, right?
Yep, makes sense.
And between each vertebra, you've got these intervertebral discs. They're like these little cushions or shock absorbers.
Right.
And then you've got the spinal canal, which is basically the highway for your spinal cord, carrying all those crucial nerve signals.
Makes sense.
So, getting these measurements right of the discs, the canal, it's super important for diagnosing a whole bunch of conditions. Like you've got disc degeneration, herniated discs, spinal stenosis, things like that.
Yeah, those are no joke. I mean, they can really cause some serious pain and even disability. So how are these measurements typically done now? What's the process and what are some of the downsides of the challenges?
Traditionally, it's been all about the radiologists, those highly trained folks who look at the MRIs.
Right.
And they've got to manually measure everything. It's a lot of looking at images, using tools, and trying to be super precise.
Sounds pretty painstaking.
It is. It takes time. It can be subjective, meaning, two different radiologists might get slightly different measurements.
So there's that human element that can introduce some variability.
Exactly. It's not always easy to be perfectly consistent. It's like, trying to measure the width of a hair with a ruler. It can be tough.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. I can see why there's a need for a more standardized and accurate approach. So that's where the AI comes in. Tell us a bit about the system that they developed in this research. How does it actually work?
So this AI system, it's really cool. It's using deep learning, which is this powerful type of AI, and it's combined with a specific kind of neural network architecture called nnU-Net.
Okay, nnU-Net. I'm already lost.
Yeah, it sounds pretty fancy, doesn't it? But basically, this nnU-Net, it's a real whiz at learning from tons of data. In this case, they fed it a massive amount of MRI scans, and it figured out how to really accurately identify, draw an outline around all these different parts of the spine.
It can pinpoint exactly where the vertebrae are, where the discs are, all of that.
Yep. It's like having a super smart measuring tool that's specifically designed for spines. And the cool thing is it can adapt to the different shapes and sizes you find in different people's spine.
Oh, that's really smart. Because everyone's spine's a little different, right?
Exactly. And that's where nnU-Net really shines. It can handle all that variability and still be super accurate.
Okay, so nnU-Net is the key to this whole thing.
That's a big part of it, yeah. Think of it like this. If you had a detective trying to analyze a crime scene, even if the furniture's been moved around or the lighting's bad, a really good detective can still figure out what happened.
Right.
nnU-Net's kind of like that. It can deal with variations in the images, different MRI machines, different patient positions, all that stuff, and still come up with a really precise analysis.
That's a really good way to put it. So the AI, it uses this nnU-Net thing to find all the structures in the spine, and then what?
Right, so that's the first step, the segmentation, but then it needs to actually measure those structures.
Gotcha.
And for that, they use another type of neural network called a 3D CNN.
Okay, so 2 steps, segmentation and then measurement.
Exactly. And the results they got with this AI, they're pretty mind-blowing.
Okay, spill the beans. What kind of results are we talking about?
So they used something called the dice coefficient to check how accurate the AI was at segmenting the different parts of the spine.
Okay, dice coefficient, that's new to me. What's that?
Think of it like a score from 0 to 1, where 1 means a perfect match. Like the AI's segmentation perfectly overlaps with the actual structures.
Got it.
So for the lumbar spine, they got a dice coefficient of 0.94.
0.94, that's pretty close to 1.
Right. And then for the cervical spine, it was 0.91, and for the thoracic spine, 0.90.
Wow, those are really, really good scores.
Right. It's showing that the AI is incredibly accurate at identifying those spinal structures.
I mean, that's amazing, especially compared to, the manual way of doing things, which we talked about earlier with all its limitations.
Absolutely. It's a huge leap forward in terms of accuracy and consistency.
So these dice coefficients, they sound impressive, but what do they actually mean in, the real world? How accurate are we talking?
Well, to put it into perspective, these scores suggest that the AI is pretty much on par with, if you had 2 expert human radiologists looking at the same scan.
Wow, so it's basically like having another expert on hand, but one that never gets tired or needs a coffee break?
Exactly.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, before you could even feed these MRI images to the AI, is there any, prep work that needs to be done?
That's a great question. It's not just a matter of like throwing any old MRI image at the AI.
Right, right.
They actually had to do some pre-processing. So like they had to make sure all the images were the same resolution, and they had to adjust for differences in contrast between different MRI machines.
So it's like making sure all the data is speaking the same language before you give it to the AI, right?
Exactly. It's all about making sure the AI is working with consistent and high quality data, and that ultimately affects how accurate it's going to be.
Yeah, that makes total sense. When we were talking earlier, you mentioned that this AI was trained on a data set of over 1 million MRI scans.
Right.
1 million. That just blows my mind. Why is that so important?
Yeah, that's one of the things that makes this research so significant.
Okay.
Training an AI model on that much data in such a diverse data set, it's huge. It means the AI has seen all sorts of variations in the spinal anatomy, in image quality, even the different types of MRI machines used.
Right.
So basically, it's had a really good education, which helps it be more accurate when it encounters new images, ones it's never seen before.
It's like the more experience the AI has, the better it gets at handling whatever you throw at it.
Precisely.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But I'm also curious, how do we actually know if this AI is measuring things correctly?
Good point. It's not just about the AI spitting out numbers. We've got to make sure they're the right numbers.
Exactly.
So in addition to that dice coefficient we talked about earlier for segmentation, they use another metric called mean squared error, or MSE.
MSE. Okay, another new term. Break it down for me.
Sure. Basically, MSE tells you how close the AI's measurements are to the actual real-world values. The lower the MSE, the better.
Okay, so a lower MSE means the AI is hitting the bullseye more consistently.
Exactly. You got it.
So what kind of MSE values did this AI actually get?
They were really good. For things like disc height and spinal canal diameter, the MSE values were somewhere between 1.3 to 1.8 millimeters squared.
Okay, and that's considered good.
Very good. Those low values suggest that the AI's measurements are super precise.
Wow, okay, numbers are great, but paint me a picture. Can you give me some specific examples of what that precision actually looks like?
Sure. So let's take the spinal canal in the lumbar spine.
Okay.
They were measuring the front to back diameter, and on average, the AI was only off by about 1.3 millimeters squared.
Really? That's tiny.
Right. And when you consider that even small changes in the spinal canal diameter can be really important for diagnosis, that level of precision is huge.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's like the AI has a microscopic ruler or something. So this AI is clearly killing it in the accuracy department.
It really is.
But what about the practical stuff? Like, how could this actually change things for doctors and patients in the real world?
Imagine this. A radiologist's got a ton of spinal MRIs to review. They're swamped, right?
Yeah, always busy.
Now they have this AI tool that can analyze those scans incredibly quickly and accurately. It's like a superpowered assistant.
That would be a game changer. It would free up so much of their time.
Exactly. Instead of spending all that time on measurements, they can focus on the more complex parts of diagnosis and planning treatment. Plus, with this AI, you're getting more consistent and accurate results, which means patients could get diagnosed and treated faster.
Okay, so faster diagnoses, more accurate results, less stressed out radiologists, and happier patients. It's like healthcare utopia.
We can dream, right? But seriously, this AI has the potential to make a real difference.
It really does.
Yeah.
But let's not get too carried away. Are there any, limitations to this AI system? Anything the researchers are still working on, or maybe some challenges they're facing?
Of course, no technology is perfect. One of the things they're still working on is making the AI more robust to variations in the shape of the spine.
What do you mean by that?
Well, everyone's spine is a little bit different, right? Some people have more curvature, some have a straighter spine, and the AI needs to be able to handle all those variations accurately.
So are you saying that the AI might not be as accurate if it encounters a spine that's, way outside the norm?
It's possible, yeah. It also depends on the quality of the MRI image. If the image is blurry or has artifacts, that can throw off the AI's analysis.
So it's kind of like the AI needs a certain level of clean data to do its job properly. Just like we humans have trouble reading a handwritten note that's all messy and scribbled.
Haha, exactly.
So how do they get the AI to be better at handling those more unusual cases?
That's what they're working on now, actually. They're planning to expand the training data set, add more examples of different spine shapes and image variations. The more the AI sees, the better it gets at adapting to those trickier situations.
So they're basically giving it a more well-rounded education.
Exactly.
Okay, I can see how that would help. We've covered a ton of ground already. Can you just give us a quick summary of the key takeaways so far?
Sure. So this AI system for measuring spines is really showing a lot of promise. It can do those time-consuming measurements automatically with really high accuracy. It could be a game changer for how we assess spinal health.
Amazing. But before we move on, can we dig a bit deeper into some of those results? Like those dice coefficients you mentioned, they sound really good, but I'd love to get into the specifics.
Of course, happy to. Let's take a look at Table 4 from the paper, which focuses on the different vertebrae in the cervical and lumbar spine. Remember, the closer that dice coefficient is to 1, the better the match.
Got it.
What's really interesting is how consistent the scores are across the different vertebrae. So in the cervical spine, the dice coefficients range from 0.87 for C2 and C7 up to 0.89 for C5.
So no matter which vertebra it's looking at in the cervical spine, the AI is doing a good job. That's pretty impressive.
Right. And then when you look at the lumbar spine, the numbers get even better. The range there is from 0.90 for L1 to by about 4.92 for L3.
Wow, so it's even better at the lumbar spine. Why do you think that is?
Hard to say for sure, but it could be that the lumbar vertebrae are generally larger, which makes them easier to segment. Also, they mentioned that the AI was really good at segmenting the discs in the lumbar spine.
Okay, yeah, those discs are super important for measuring things like disc height, right?
Exactly. So the AI is acing the segmentation test, but what about the actual measurements?
Right, right.
How well did it do at measuring things like disc height and spinal canal diameter? Well, that's where Table 5 comes in. It shows the mean squared error values, or MSE, remember those?
Lower is better.
You got it. So in the cervical spine, the MSE values for disc height were between 1.5 and 1.8 millimeters squared.
So on average, it was only off by that much.
Yeah, pretty tiny discrepancies, which is amazing when you think about how small those discs are.
Right. And what about the lumbar spine?
Even lower MSE values there, between 1.3 and 1.5 millimeters squared for disc height.
Okay, this AI is really blowing my mind.
It's pretty remarkable, right? And remember, even small changes in these measurements can be clinically significant.
Right, right. That's what we were talking about earlier.
So being able to measure those changes accurately is really important for diagnosis and monitoring.
Yeah, this AI could help doctors catch those subtle changes way earlier, maybe even prevent bigger problems down the road.
Absolutely. Early detection is key.
Okay, we've talked about dice coefficients and MSE, all these fancy metrics showing how accurate the AI is.
Right.
But I'm looking at the paper here, and there's this table 6. It mentions something called precision and recall. Can you tell us what those are all about?
Sure. Precision and recall, they're basically ways to evaluate how well the AI is doing at, identifying specific segments of the spine.
Okay, but what's the difference between the two? They kind of sound the same to me.
Yeah, they're related, but subtly different. Precision is all about how many of the AI's positive identifications were actually correct.
So like out of all the times it said this is a segment, how often was it right?
Exactly. It's a measure of how trustworthy those positive results are.
Okay, got it. And recall.
Recall is about how many of the actual true positive cases the AI was able to catch. So if there were, say, 10 segments in an image, how many of those 10 did the AI correctly identify?
So it's like making sure the AI isn't missing anything important.
Exactly. You want it to be accurate, but you also don't want it to miss anything crucial.
Right, right. So precision is about minimizing those false positives, and recall is about minimizing the false negatives.
Exactly.
And table 6 shows those numbers.
Yep. And the good news is the AI is scoring really high on both precision and recall.
Really? Like, give me some examples.
Okay, so for the cervical spine, the precision for identifying segments like C1, C2, and C2, C3 is above 97%, and the recall is above 96%.
Wow. So it's really good at finding those segments and not making many mistakes.
Yep. And the lumbar spine is a similar story. The numbers there for segments like L1, L2, and L4, L5 are also really high.
Okay, so this AI is clearly a superstar. It's doing amazingly well across the board.
Yeah, it's really impressive. And this is just the beginning. There's still so much potential for improvement and new applications.
I'm really curious about that, actually. I mean, we've been talking a lot about this specific research, but I'm wondering, where do you see AI going in healthcare as a whole? Like, what's the big picture?
It's such a huge question, but I think AI has the potential to really change everything about healthcare. How we diagnose diseases, how we treat them, even how we understand the human body. It's like a whole new era of medicine is unfolding.
It's so exciting, but also kind of scary at the same time, right?
Definitely. AI is powerful. And like any powerful technology, it's important to use it wisely and ethically.
Absolutely. It's not just about the technology itself. It's about how we choose to use it.
Exactly.
Okay, wow. We've covered so much ground today, from the super technical details of this AI system to these big philosophical questions about AI and the future of healthcare. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away from all of this?
The key takeaway for me is this. We're witnessing a massive shift in healthcare, driven by AI. It's going to revolutionize everything. But we need to be thoughtful and responsible about how we develop and deploy these technologies. We got to make sure they truly benefit patients and society.
Beautifully said. I couldn't agree more. It's both exciting and a bit daunting, but I'm optimistic that we can harness the power of AI for good. Now, before we jump into the next part of our deep dive, let's take a quick break to process all this amazing information.
It's amazing to think that they trained this thing on 1 million scans.
I know, right? 1 million.
But spines are so complex.
Yeah.
Even 1 million scans might not be enough to capture every single variation.
That's true. You're bringing up a really good point, actually. I mean, 1 million scans is a lot, but it's still a finite number.
Right.
And spines, well, they're incredibly complex and variable. So I imagine even with 1 million scans, there might be some unusual cases that the AI hasn't seen before.
Exactly. And that's one of the things the researchers are focusing on right now. They're continuing to refine the AI by adding more data.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's kind of an ongoing process.
It is. It's like our own medical education.
Right.
We never really stop learning. We're always encountering new and unique cases.
Exactly.
And that's where the beauty of machine learning comes in. As the AI encounters more data, more variations, it gets better at generalizing.
It's almost like the AI is learning and adapting just like we do as doctors.
Precisely. It's constantly evolving and improving. Speaking of evolving, let's go back to the research for a second.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
We've talked a lot about how well this AI performs.
The dice coefficients, the accuracy of the measurements, all that.
Right, all of that. But I'm curious, how would this AI actually be used in a clinic?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's one thing to have this amazing technology, but How do you actually integrate it into the real world?
Well, imagine a radiologist is looking at a patient's spinal MRI.
Oh.
Instead of having to manually take all those measurements, they could use this AI as an assistant.
Oh, I see. So the AI does all the heavy lifting.
In a sense, yes. The AI could quickly and accurately segment the vertebrae, measure the disc heights, the spinal canal diameter, all of that.
So it's not replacing the radiologist.
No, not at all.
It's more like a superpowered assistant, right?
Exactly. And that's where I see the real value of AI in healthcare. It's not about replacing human expertise. It's about augmenting it, making us more efficient and effective.
It's like having a second pair of expert eyes, but ones that never get tired.
Exactly. And they're really fast. But, even with all the benefits, I can imagine some people might be hesitant about AI in healthcare.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a big change, and
Yeah.
healthcare is such a sensitive area.
Absolutely. And it's understandable that people might be hesitant. It's important to remember that AI is just a tool.
Right.
Like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad. It all comes down to how we choose to develop and implement it.
So it's not really a question of if AI will play a role in healthcare, but how.
Exactly. We need to make sure it's used responsibly and ethically. That's why it's so important to have these conversations, to talk about the potential benefits and challenges, and to ensure AI aligns with our values as a society.
It's a reminder that technology is ultimately a reflection of us, of our choices.
Well said. But let's get back to the research for a moment.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
We've talked about the AI's analysis.
The segmentation, the measurements.
Right. But what happens after that? What's the next step?
That's a good question. I'm curious too.
Well, that's where post-processing comes in. Think of it as the final polish before the AI's output is given to the clinician.
Okay, we talked about that briefly earlier, but can we dive into some specifics?
Absolutely. So in this research, they used a couple of key post-processing techniques. One is called removing small disconnected components. So imagine the AI segments a vertebra. But there's this tiny little blob of pixels that was mistakenly identified as part of the vertebra. It's not really part of the bone, it's just noise or an artifact in the image.
Oh, I see. Like a little speck of dust in a photo.
Exactly. And the post-processing step gets rid of those tiny blobs. So only the actual vertebra is included in the final segmentation.
So like cleaning up the image, making it super precise.
Exactly. It's like digitally remastering an old film, removing all the scratches and imperfections.
I love that analogy.
And another technique they used is applying a smoothing filter to the edges of the segmented structures.
A smoothing filter, what does that do?
It smooths out any jagged or rough edges, making the outlines more visually appealing and easier to interpret. So imagine you've drawn an outline of something,
Okay.
but the lines are a bit wobbly.
Right.
The smoothing filter basically cleans those lines up.
Makes them look more professional, like a polished drawing.
Exactly. And that's important because we want the AI's output to be clear and easy for clinicians to understand.
Right. It's all about presenting the information in a way that's useful and actionable.
Precisely. And that's a key consideration in developing any AI system for healthcare.
It's not enough for the AI to be accurate.
Right.
It needs to be user-friendly and fit seamlessly into those existing clinical workflows.
Absolutely. So we've been focusing a lot on this specific AI for spinal measurement.
Which is amazing.
It is. But I'm curious, where do you see AI going in healthcare as a whole?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
AI is already making waves in healthcare. Where do you think it's headed next?
Oh, there are so many possibilities. We're already seeing AI being used for things like analyzing medical images for cancer detection and diagnosing heart disease.
Wow.
And it's being used to personalize treatments, predict patient outcomes, even help with drug discovery.
It's like AI is quietly revolutionizing every corner of healthcare.
I think that's a great way to put it. And I believe we're just scratching the surface. As AI technology gets even more sophisticated and we collect more data, the applications are going to explode.
It's exciting, but it's also a little bit intimidating, isn't it? To think about all that potential and all the unknowns.
Absolutely. But before we get too lost in the vast world of AI, let's bring it back to our focus today.
Spinal measurement.
Yes. So after all this discussion, what are the key takeaways you want our listeners to remember?
Okay, let's distill it down.
The main thing is this. AI has the potential to revolutionize how we assess spinal health. This research shows us that AI can do those time-consuming measurements automatically with incredible accuracy. It could lead to faster diagnoses, more personalized treatments, and better outcomes for patients.
It's a message of hope, a glimpse into a future where healthcare is even more effective and patient-centered.
Exactly. And it's just the beginning of the AI journey in spinal healthcare. There's so much more to discover, but I think we've covered a lot of ground for one deep dive.
Yeah, we have. It's been an incredible conversation. Welcome back to the deep dive. We spent this episode really getting into the details of AI for spinal health.
It's really fascinating stuff.
It is. And I think it's pretty clear that this technology has the potential to, well, like we were saying before the break, totally revolutionize how we approach spinal care.
Yeah, I agree.
But like with any new technology, especially in healthcare, I imagine there were some bumps in the road before this AI is actually being used in clinics all over the place.
Oh, definitely. There are always challenges when you're trying to bring a new technology into the real world, especially in a field as complex as healthcare.
So what do you see as some of the biggest hurdles to actually implementing this AI system in real-world healthcare settings?
Well, we've been talking about the technical achievements, the impressive accuracy and all that.
Right.
But to actually use this in clinics, there's a whole other layer of things to consider. One of the biggest challenges is, integration.
Integration.
Yeah, like how do you seamlessly fit this AI tool into the way radiologists already work.
Right, because they're already so busy, right?
Exactly, they're swamped. So this AI system, it can't be something that adds more to their plate. It has to be user-friendly, intuitive, efficient. It should make their lives easier, not more complicated.
Yeah, it needs to feel like a helpful assistant, not like another piece of software they have to learn to use.
Precisely. So user interface, workflow, all of that is super important.
Okay, that makes sense. And then I imagine there's the whole issue of like validation and getting the official okay to use this kind of technology, right?
Oh, absolutely. Before any AI system can be used clinically, it has to go through really rigorous testing.
Right, to make sure it's safe and that it actually works.
Exactly. You have to prove that it's accurate, reliable, that it won't pose any risks to patients, and then there's regulatory approval. In the US, you've got the FDA, they need to be on board.
Right, the FDA has really strict standards for approving new medical technologies.
And for good reason. We're talking about people's health here.
Absolutely. So it's a long road to get a new technology like this into clinics. But let's say all those hurdles are cleared. What do you see as the long-term impact of this AI on the field of spinal healthcare?
I think it could be huge. I really do. We're talking about a future where radiologists have this AI assistant working alongside them, helping them analyze every spinal MRI.
So it's like a second set of eyes, but super-powered eyes that can catch things we humans might miss.
Exactly. The AI could help them detect subtle changes, measure things with incredible precision, even flag a potential issues that might have been overlooked.
That's amazing. And what about the impact on patients? How would this AI actually change their experience?
Well, I think for patients, one of the biggest benefits would be faster diagnoses. If the AI is assisting with the analysis, radiologists could potentially review those scans much quicker.
Which means patients wouldn't have to wait as long for answers.
Exactly. Less waiting, less anxiety, and hopefully better outcomes in the end.
That makes sense.
Ah.
But I'm also thinking about the radiologists themselves. I mean, some people might worry that AI will eventually replace them altogether. What are your thoughts on that?
I get why people might think that. It's a natural concern when you see how powerful AI is becoming. But I don't think it's about replacement. It's about collaboration.
Okay, so radiologists and AI working together.
Exactly. Like a team. Radiologists bring so much to the table.
Yeah.
Years of training, experience, clinical judgment, all that.
Right, AI can't replace that human element.
Not yet, anyway. But AI can do things humans can't. It can process massive amounts of data. It can make incredibly precise measurements. It can spot patterns we might miss.
So each brings their own strengths to the table.
Exactly. And when you combine those strengths, you have the potential to do some truly amazing things for patients.
I love that perspective. It's not about humans versus machines. It's about humans and machines working together for a common goal.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this whole field so exciting.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? We've explored the technical side of this incredible AI system. We've talked about the challenges of actually bringing it into clinics. And we've even pondered the future of AI in healthcare. It's been a truly fascinating deep dive.
I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's always so inspiring to talk about these groundbreaking advancements and how they might change the world.
And for our listeners, I hope this has sparked your own curiosity about AI and its potential to revolutionize healthcare. It's a field that's changing rapidly, and it's only going to become more important in the years to come. So stay curious, stay informed, and who knows, maybe you'll be part of this amazing journey.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of knowledge.